Explore the harmony of health and holiness through a Catholic lens. Discover how faith rooted in tradition fosters vibrant living. This podcast rebroadcasts the weekly Becoming Gift segment on Morning Offering on Ave Maria Radio. You can check out the Physically Spiritual podcast from Awakened Catholic for my long-form discussions and presentations, or you can find my Substack at becominggift.com. This is your host, Andrew Reinhardt.
We're going to focus on fasting through Lent this year. Matthew 6 says, "When you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites. They neglect their appearance so that they may appear to others to be fasting. And when I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that you may not appear to others to be fasting, except to your Father who is hidden. And your Father who sees what is hidden will repay you." Now, we might not just anoint our face, maybe it means putting on some foundation or something in this day of age, but the basic idea here of fasting in a way that God recognizes and not making a show of it is, I think, the central thrust of this passage. But it's easy to overlook the way that Jesus starts these two rules. He says, when you fast. He doesn't say if you fast, he says when you fast, meaning that it was implied at this time, it was generally understood at this time that you do fast. That fasting is a part of life, that it is a part of religious practice. It's assumed by Jesus that fasting is mandatory, that fasting is a part of what we do. And this is so countercultural for our society that believes that you need to have 3 square meals and a couple snacks in between, right?
Yeah, graze.
I was listening to this lecture earlier this week where they were talking about the advent of snacking and how a lot of it was driven by marketing. How do we sell more food to people? We'll convince them they need more meals. 3, and then once we got them in 3, then we got to get them into the snacks. Of course, when we fast, there's physical considerations. We got to talk to our doctor, be smart about it. You know, obviously, if you struggle with some disease of your blood sugar or something like that, you need to take that into consideration. And there's psychological considerations, right? The difference between fasting and anorexia is really just your mind and your history and your psychological state. So all that needs to be taken into consideration. You need to make wise choices around fasting. But historically, there's an aspect of fasting, I think, that's really hard for us to capture in our society. When you're fasting and there's a supermarket a block away, it's different than if you're fasting and, there's no food around.
Right.
You just eat off of the flock that you have or the crops that you're growing or the goodness of a neighbor or what have you. But there was historically a situation where you weren't guaranteed the next meal. There wasn't so much food safety. There was really kind of a food scarcity or food insecurity. So an act of fasting historically was a greater act of trust than I think we can really access in our society because there's always another meal for us. We have more food. I think in the United States, we throw away a third of our food because it spoils or people don't eat it or we just can't use it. Nobody buys it. So we're throwing away a third of our food in our country. So there's a part of fasting that we can't fully access. So I think we need to, in our society, also take on other ways of fasting that help us to trust in the Lord in a way that we can't access with fasting. This is from 1430 of the Catechism. It says, Jesus calls to conversion and penance, like that of the prophets before him, does not aim at outward works, sackcloth and ashes, fasting and mortification, but at the conversion of the heart, interior conversion. Without this, such penances remain sterile and false. However, interior conversion urges expression in visible signs, gestures, and works of penance. When I fast, it's important for me to set my intention. Now, I know some people might not struggle with this like I do, but you can fast for health. A lot of people talk about intermittent fasting and timed eating and fasting to lose weight and fasting to improve your blood glucose and fasting to turn on autophagy and reset your cells and everything else. But when I fast, it's important for me to start the day and say, Lord, I'm fasting for you, meaning I'm not doing this so my clothes fit or so that I can have less numbers on the scale or whatever. Now, maybe some people can kind of split their intentions and have both in mind, but when I fast, I need to set my intention on the Lord. This is from St. Ignatius of Loyola, his 10th edition of the first week in his rules in his book on the spiritual exercises. He said the first way is as to eating, that is to say, when you leave off the superfluous, it is not penance, but temperance. It is penance when you leave off the suitable, and the more and more, the greater and better, provided that the person does not injure himself and that no notable illness follows. Right, so there's this rule that Ignatius is saying, if you're just leaving off the superfluous, meaning like, oh, I'm not going to eat desserts or I'm going to stop having alcohol or something like that, he's saying that's not actually fasting, right? That's just temperance. And certainly temperance is a suitable thing to do during Lent. So if you're planning to give up chocolate or alcohol, do it. That's good. That's a good Lenten practice, but it's not really fasting. What Ignatius is saying here is when you fast is when you're giving up something you need, like choosing to not eat enough calories or maybe to restrict the amount of protein that you eat or something like that. But the rule is, of course, don't injure yourself or cause illness. So I think this passage presents, a very helpful topology of the fasting environment. So there are different ways we can enter into fasting. One way is actually timing your eating. The Church actually proposes something like this. Today on Ash Wednesday, Good Friday, it says eat one meal, eat a normal, modest meal. And if you need to, you can have 2 smaller portions of food that don't equal that one meal. Well, just eating one meal, that looks a lot like a 24-hour fast, which a lot of health influencers recommend these days. Another way of fast is a complete fast, just water. Some monks enter into a bread and water fast, or they won't eat meat. That's our Eastern brothers and sisters will sometimes do a fast through Lent where they're choosing not to eat meat. And that's a true fast because they're likely not going to get enough protein, to maintain all of their lean mass in their body during that time. But then some people choose to fast in a way that's even more interior than that. Meaning what they do is they look at their heart, where their heart's really drawing them, and they give up something specific, something really deeply personal, right? And so this is something you have to look at for yourself. Like for me, something deeply personal and specific is salt.
Oh, wow.
I grew up in a family that heavily salted their food, and I tend to not really like the flavor of things if it's not heavily salted, right? So that's a way maybe I could fast and no one would ever even notice. Now, the body actually does need salt, right? There is a necessity for salt, so that could be a true way of fasting. So in any way we might choose to fast this Lent, I think it's important that we do. It's something that Jesus assumed that we would do as Christians. It's one of the basic recommendations of the Church of a way to enter into the Lenten season. And it's a way that we need to turn toward the Lord and repent, as our reading says today.
Intentional fasting. Do it for the right reason and make that conscious decision to put your stamp on it like that. Perfect.
Andrew, how do you read the whole thing of big pushes, obviously, for fasting from technology? How does that kind of fit into what you're talking about?
Yeah, I would take it and apply it right into Ignatius's words. Just giving up the superfluous is temperance. So to really fast from technology, ask, what can I actually do to give up something that feels more essential and rely on the Lord? Like something I enjoy doing from time to time is driving without a map.
Yeah.
So I'll look up the directions. And there is an act of faith. There's always a moment in every drive where I wonder, maybe I've gone too far.
I love it.
And maybe I have to pull off to the side of the road and talk to somebody.
I love it.
And maybe I'll make a new friend too.
Thank you for listening to Becoming Gift. You can catch the show live every Wednesday at 8 a.m. Eastern on Ave Maria Radio. You can also find my long-form podcasts, discussions, and presentations on the Physically Spiritual podcast. Subscribe to my Substack at becominggift.com to find more from me, and don't forget to like and subscribe.